Welcome back to Where You Live on Shaw TV. I'm here with Jamie Nichols. He is a roast master with Crantz Coffee. Now, Jamie, you talked with Sarah about the whole roasting process. Now, over 500 billion cups of coffee are drank in the world, probably more than that. Let's talk about buying coffee. Now, something we always hear about with coffee is organic and free trade. Now, how important are both of those things?
Organic and free trade certifications are sometimes very expensive certifications. They sometimes will hide a poorer quality coffee in a better buzzword. For most coffee, you're going to find that it's going to be fairly traded or ethically traded. Some of the companies that sell coffee or grow coffee can't afford the certification process, even though they're getting a fair trade for their coffee. Specialty coffee, especially, is usually bought at a much higher rate than fair trade prices. So fair trade prices are usually about 20% above the C price or the commodity price of coffee. Specialty coffee is typically traded much higher than that, up to 4 times, 5 times, sometimes 10, 15 times the C price of coffee. So sometimes it's not the best.
So it's kind of confusing because everyone always automatically thinks, right? Oh, free trade, that's the best coffee to buy.
Absolutely. And I think what you should look for when you're looking at a bag of coffee in terms of free trade is look for the ethical trade. Free trade is a great option because it's ensuring that the farmer is getting the right amount of money for their coffee. But ethically traded companies, local roasters, will usually have a way to trace back their coffee to whoever bought the coffee. So it's very important to have that transparency in the transactions. Sometimes it doesn't need to be certified, though.
Okay, now let's talk about organic. Now everyone thinks organic is the best, right? Now, is it that way with coffee?
Organic is, again, a bit of a buzzword. The certification process is also can be very, very confusing and very expensive. So a lot of farmers, while they may grow organically, can't afford the certification process. So even though they're not organic, they are organic. For instance, a place in Kenya, for instance, is making $1,000 US per year. That farmer is not going to be able to afford a couple of $1,000s in pesticides or whatever it's going to take to make it non-organic. The basic thing is to remember is that free trade organic does not mean quality, and quality does not mean free trade organic. The big thing is to read the label, get the history of the coffee, look for ethical trade, and do as much research as you can. And if you ever in doubt, talk to the person selling the coffee. If they can't tell you about the coffee, then you probably shouldn't buy the coffee.
Okay, now my next question is, I'm the one that buys coffee for my husband because my husband can't go a day without coffee. When I'm standing in the store looking at coffee and there's hundreds that you could choose from, what should I be looking for?
The first thing that I would suggest is look for a local coffee, so locally roasted or as close to locally roasted as you can. And after that, the really important thing is the roast date. So find out when it was roasted. If it has a best before date, which is sometimes up to a year after it was roasted, that coffee is not going to be any good. Typically, coffee has a shelf life of about 2 weeks to 1 month, so you want to be consuming it after the roast date to that point. And that's one of the key components there. After that, you can really look into where does the coffee come from? Was it ethically traded? Is it organic, if that's your thing? So if fair trade organic is meaningful to you, then by all means, look for fair trade organic. And after that, again, talk to the people that are selling it. They'll give you the information.
Now, what about grinding? Because you always hear people, they're grinding their coffee at home, or I go to Starbucks for tea lattes, and you can say if people are grinding, they're getting their beans ground at Starbucks. And is that important? Absolutely.
You want to grind a few minutes before you brew. So within 5 minutes of grinding, you want to brew, and you want to use something called a burr grinder. That's the key thing. If you're going to invest in anything in your coffee arsenal, the grinder is the single most important thing.
Okay, good to know. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the myths surrounding coffee, because the one thing, I have teenagers, and they love coffee, and I tell my daughter it's going to stunt her growth.
No, they did a bunch of studies on that, and it turns out that is a bit of a fiction. I think that was just a way for kids not to be drinking caffeine.
Well, that's what I was trying for.
Yeah, no, that's been debunked a while back. So
what are some other myths that are surrounding coffee?
One of the biggest ones that I run into a lot is, well, coffee will dehydrate you, and the funny thing is that coffee is 99.8% water. So coffee is a bit of a diuretic, so it'll make you pee, but it won't only do that if you've had more than 6 cups of coffee, large cups of coffee in a row, at which point you've drank large cups of coffee, you're going to pee. So I mean, so the idea is that the net effect is hydration.
Right, okay. Now, coffee aids in weight loss and increases your metabolism. Is that a myth?
That is also a myth. Basically what it is the idea was that the caffeine would invigorate the body and you might get a bit of a lift from it, but they've done some tests and they found out that the actual net effect of caffeine in your system while you're exercising has no noticeable effect, so no measurable effect.
Okay, what about coffee and sleeping? Because that's a big thing. A lot of times they say don't drink caffeine past 2 o'clock because it'll hurt your sleep patterns.
Well, part of the myth is that it'll create insomnia. So too much coffee will create insomnia. The 2 o'clock in the afternoon thing is something that I actually believe in. It takes about 7 hours for caffeine to leave your system. So as long as you're not trying to go to sleep within that 7 hours, you should be okay. But the myth is that there's so much coffee consumption that it's going to ruin your sleep patterns and so on. It won't. So as long as you're letting that half-life or the life of coffee or caffeine to get out of your system, you should be okay.
Now, one of the things on here is that espresso beans exist, but I have a question about espresso quickly. What is espresso? So
espresso is a method of brewing. It is not a bean. You can use any bean you want in espresso, in an espresso maker, but it is nothing more than a form of brewing, which is a high pressure of water through finely ground beans. It's a process. Espresso beans are sometimes blended differently or they're roasted slightly differently to be better espresso for espressos, but there's no such thing as an espresso bean. So when you see something marketed as espresso, it's a bit of marketing right there.
Okay, good to know. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. Now we've talked about coffee itself, we've talked about the roasting, how to buy coffee, and coming up next on the show, we'll be talking about how to brew coffee properly. So keep watching, there's more on Where You Live on Shaw TV.